I'm Amanda Sullivan, 38, former Chief Engineering Officer at Sullivan Industries, our family's aerospace company. Yesterday, my parents called me into the office and fired me for being too expensive, despite delivering record profits for 12 straight quarters. 12 years of 70-hour workweeks, postponed marriage, and unwavering loyalty, gone in a 15-minute meeting. Now Dad's calling me in panic because the company's imploding since they replaced me with my incompetent brother Lawrence, who couldn't engineer his way out of a paper bag. I'm still processing everything that happened, but before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. This family betrayal cut deeper than I ever imagined possible, and if you've experienced workplace karma or family disloyalty, hit subscribe to join others who understand that blood relations don't guarantee loyalty. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Sullivan Industries wasn't just a company to me. It was my heritage, my future, and supposedly my birthright. My grandfather, Harold Sullivan, founded the company in 1972 with nothing but brilliant engineering instincts and an old garage in Detroit. He built it from scratch, creating innovative aerospace components that eventually became industry standards. Growing up, the dinner table conversations were about thrust ratios and material fatigue testing rather than typical family matters. I absorbed it all like a sponge, fascinated by the complex world my grandfather had created. From the time I could hold a screwdriver, my father James groomed me to take over the family business. "Amanda, you've got the Sullivan engineering gene," he'd say proudly, watching me disassemble and reassemble my toys with methodical precision. Unlike my younger brother Lawrence, who was more interested in video games and socializing, I showed a natural aptitude for mechanical concepts. My mother Margaret, although not an engineer herself, encouraged my technical interests while simultaneously pushing Lawrence toward the people side of the business. I followed the path laid out for me with enthusiasm. After graduating high school as valedictorian, I earned my engineering degree from MIT, graduating summa cum laude. During summers, I completed prestigious internships at Boeing and Lockheed Martin, where I received multiple job offers with six-figure starting salaries. Despite these lucrative opportunities, I never questioned my return to Sullivan Industries. It wasn't just duty. I genuinely wanted to build on my grandfather's legacy. "You're making the right choice," my father assured me when I declined a particularly tempting offer from SpaceX. "Someday, all of this will be yours." My early years at Sullivan Industries were challenging but fulfilling. Despite my credentials, I started on the shop floor, learning every aspect of production. The veteran engineers, men who had worked alongside my grandfather, tested me relentlessly, but I earned their respect through competence rather than my last name. Within 18 months, I was leading my first project team. Even then, I noticed concerning patterns in how my parents treated Lawrence compared to me. While I worked 60-hour weeks learning the business from the ground up, Lawrence was given a cushy sales position immediately after his business degree from a mid-tier state university. His frequent extended lunches and early departures went unmentioned at family dinners, while every minor mistake I made became a topic of discussion. "Engineering requires precision, Amanda," my father would lecture, ignoring that Lawrence had lost another potential client by being unprepared. Despite these double standards, I thrived. Within 3 years, I had brought in 5 new major clients and modernized our production processes, cutting manufacturing time by 30%. My technical knowledge earned me the respect of our engineering staff, many of whom began coming to me instead of my father with their innovations and concerns. My father noticed this shift in loyalty and responded by assigning me increasingly complex projects, which I interpreted as a sign of his trust. The Sullivan S-300 flight control system, my first major design project, won industry accolades and opened doors to military contracts that had previously been beyond our reach. What no one saw were the personal sacrifices accumulating behind my professional success. I canceled a European vacation when a production issue emerged. I postponed dating, telling myself there would be time for a relationship after we secured the Anderson Aerospace contract. When my college roommate invited me to be her maid of honor, I attended the wedding via video call from my office while finalizing critical design specifications. The company has to come first, my father had always taught me. That's what it means to carry the Sullivan name. I believed him completely. After all, hadn't my grandfather postponed his own honeymoon when a client needed him? Wasn't my mother still postponing her dream of traveling to focus on company finances? The Sullivan legacy demanded sacrifice, and I was determined to prove myself worthy of it. By my 5th year, I had developed 3 proprietary technologies that became company standards, established relationships with top-tier aerospace manufacturers, and built a reputation as one of the industry's brightest young engineers. Trade journals began mentioning me as a rising star. What I didn't realize was that with each accomplishment, each innovation, each new client relationship, I was setting the stage for resentment rather than recognition from the people whose approval I sought most. I remember the day I overheard my mother talking to Lawrence in the kitchen during a family dinner. "Don't worry about Amanda's technical successes," she said. "When the time comes, you'll be the one running Sullivan Industries. You have the people skills this company truly needs." I pretended not to hear, telling myself she was just encouraging Lawrence in the areas where he excelled. I couldn't have imagined then how those casual words foreshadowed the betrayal to come. My promotion to Chief Engineering Officer came after the successful launch of our military-grade navigation system in 2012. The project had been on the brink of failure when my father reluctantly handed it to me, following the resignation of our previous engineering director. Working nights and weekends for 3 straight months, I redesigned critical components, salvaged client relationships, and delivered the system not only on time, but exceeding performance specifications. The morning after the successful final testing, my father called me into his office. For once, he seemed genuinely impressed. "You've earned this," he said, sliding the official promotion letter across his desk. The moment should have felt triumphant, but his next words tempered my joy. "Let's see if you can handle the real pressure now." That real pressure arrived 6 weeks later in the form of the Barrett Aerospace contract, a $40 million opportunity to develop next-generation control systems for commercial aircraft. It was the largest potential deal in Sullivan Industries history, one that would transform us from a mid-sized supplier to a major industry player. My father made it clear, landing this contract was entirely my responsibility. "This is your chance to prove yourself," he said. "Don't disappoint the family." For the next 3 months, I lived and breathed the Barrett proposal. I assembled our most talented engineers, personally reviewed every specification, and developed innovative solutions to problems the client hadn't even anticipated yet. When presentation day arrived, I delivered a technical briefing so comprehensive that Barrett's chief technology officer later told me they had canceled meetings with 2 other potential suppliers. "We knew within 20 minutes that Sullivan Industries was the only choice," he said. With the Barrett contract secured, Sullivan Industries began its transformation. Our workforce grew from 20 engineers to over 150 employees within 18 months. We opened a second facility, tripled our production capacity, and invested in cutting-edge testing equipment. Revenue climbed steadily from $2 million annually to over $45 million. Each quarterly meeting showed greater profitability, and trade publications began featuring Sullivan Industries as an emerging aerospace powerhouse. At the center of this growth was my most significant innovation, the Sullivan S-500 aircraft control system. Revolutionary in its design, the S-500 offered unprecedented precision, reliability, and energy efficiency. I had conceptualized it during a rare weekend off, sketching initial designs on napkins at a coffee shop. 18 months of intensive development followed, with me personally leading the engineering team through countless iterations and testing phases. When we unveiled the system at the International Aerospace Expo, it generated immediate interest from commercial and military clients alike. "The S-500 will be Sullivan Industries' legacy," I told my father proudly after 3 major manufacturers requested implementation specifications on the same day. He nodded, seeming pleased, but said only, "Let's see if it actually delivers the projected revenue." It did. The S-500 and its derivatives eventually accounted for 60% of company revenue. I created a dedicated engineering division focused solely on advancing the technology, which became our most profitable business unit. Industry recognition followed. I accepted innovation awards on behalf of the company, gave keynote addresses at engineering conferences, and was profiled in Aviation Technology Monthly as one of the industry's 40 under 40 rising stars. Throughout this period of unprecedented growth, my personal life remained entirely subordinated to company needs. My 70-hour workweeks were the norm, not the exception. I purchased a modest home 5 minutes from the office to minimize commute time. Vacations consisted of weekend trips that could be canceled if problems arose. When friends from MIT invited me to join their successful tech startup, I declined without hesitation, my loyalty to Sullivan Industries never wavering. As the company prospered, my father gradually stepped back from day-to-day operations, though he maintained his title as CEO and never failed to take credit for innovations that had been entirely my creation. During client visits, he would casually mention our design philosophy when discussing features he had initially opposed. At industry events, he positioned himself as the visionary behind advances he had barely understood when I first proposed them. Meanwhile, Lawrence's role in the company remained ambiguous at best. After several failed attempts to establish himself in sales, he was given the title of Executive Vice President of Business Development, a position that seemed to primarily involve taking clients to golf outings and expensive dinners. His technical knowledge remained so limited that engineering staff developed a coding system to simplify concepts when he needed to be included in discussions. "Just nod and say it sounds promising," I overheard one engineer instructing Lawrence before a client meeting. "Amanda will handle the actual details." Despite his minimal contributions, Lawrence excelled at one crucial skill: currying favor with our parents. He praised my father's mentorship during family dinners, consulted my mother on business decisions that should have been operational matters, and positioned himself as the loyal child who prioritized family above all. These performances seemed harmless at first. Lawrence had always been the family charmer, but they were laying groundwork I didn't yet recognize. As Sullivan Industries approached its 30th anniversary, subtle but concerning changes began appearing in company dynamics. My mother, whose business experience was limited to basic accounting, inserted herself increasingly into technical decisions. My father began excluding me from financial meetings while including Lawrence. When I purchased my modest 3-bedroom home with my own savings, my parents commented that it was practical but small, while they helped Lawrence finance a sprawling 5-bedroom house in the city's most exclusive neighborhood. "Lawrence needs to project success to our clients," my mother explained when I questioned the different treatment. The more recognition I received from the industry, the more I sensed a cooling from my family. When Aviation Technology Monthly featured me on its cover with the headline, "The Engineering Mind Revolutionizing Aerospace," my father's only comment was to ask if I'd mentioned Sullivan Industries' founding story prominently enough. When I was invited to join the prestigious Aerospace Innovation Roundtable, the first person from our company ever included, my mother wondered aloud if attending the quarterly meetings would distract from actual work. The most telling moment came during a family dinner celebrating a record-breaking quarter. As we toasted the company's success, my father raised his glass to Sullivan Industries' bright future under the next generation of leadership. His eyes rested not on me, who had designed the products generating 90% of our revenue, but on Lawrence, who smiled with unexpected confidence. "I won't let the family down," Lawrence said, returning the toast. Something in his tone made me uneasy, but I dismissed the feeling. After all, the company's trajectory was undeniable, my position seemed secure, and surely my parents recognized who was truly driving our success. I couldn't have been more wrong. The first concrete sign that something was shifting came when my father's assistant scheduled a quarterly strategy meeting without including me. When I mentioned the oversight, she looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Sullivan said this one is just for family leadership," she explained. "I'm family leadership," I replied, confused. "I meant your father, mother, and Lawrence," she clarified, not meeting my eyes. I confronted my father afterward, trying to keep my tone casual. Was there a reason I wasn't included in today's strategy meeting? He waved dismissively. "Just financial planning, nothing engineering related." Lawrence needs to understand the business side more thoroughly if he's going to take over someday. The phrase take over lingered in my mind. Take over what? The entire company? Wasn't I already running the most critical and profitable division? This exclusion became a pattern. Financial reviews, long-term planning sessions, meetings with our corporate attorneys. Suddenly, these were non-technical matters that didn't require my presence. Meanwhile, Lawrence began appearing in my territory with increasing frequency, asking questions about our engineering processes and client relationships that seemed more like intelligence gathering than genuine interest. During a family dinner that spring, Lawrence casually mentioned an innovative approach to the Raytheon contract that I had developed the previous week. I was thinking we could modify the control architecture to incorporate redundant failsafes, he said, using terminology I knew he didn't understand. It would give us a competitive edge. My father nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of forward thinking we need. I stared at Lawrence, recognizing my exact words from a team meeting he hadn't even attended. He must have been reading my project notes or getting information from someone on my team. When I tried to clarify that this was already being implemented, my mother interrupted to ask about Lawrence's recent client dinner. The subtle sabotage continued. In meetings where we both attended, Lawrence would slightly restate my recommendations, as if they were his refinements. Documents I sent to my father would return with comments in Lawrence's handwriting. Technical accomplishments from my division began appearing in company newsletters under general leadership initiatives rather than credited to my team. Then came the salary disclosure. I hadn't thought much about compensation. My focus had always been the work itself and the company's success. But when an HR file was accidentally included in some paperwork my assistant brought me, I discovered something shocking. Lawrence's salary was 32% higher than mine, despite my much greater responsibilities and measurable contributions to the bottom line. I took a deep breath and scheduled a meeting with my father to discuss the discrepancy professionally. He listened with a stony expression as I outlined my contributions to the company and the industry recognition I'd received. Are you saying you're more valuable than your brother? He finally asked. I'm saying my compensation should reflect my contributions and responsibilities, I replied carefully. Lawrence has business relationships you don't see, my father said. And frankly, Amanda, your engineering division has become quite expensive to operate. All those specialized engineers you keep hiring, the testing equipment, the prototype development costs. Lawrence's approach is more fiscally efficient. I left the meeting with a nominal 5% raise and a growing sense of unease. Shortly afterward, my mother began making comments about my personal life during our Sunday dinners. 38 is getting rather late to start a family, Amanda, she remarked. All this focus on work, I worry you're missing what's truly important. The irony was painful. For years, they had demanded my complete dedication to Sullivan Industries, praised my work ethic, and held me to standards never applied to Lawrence. Now my childless, unmarried state was apparently a failure of priorities. The warnings from outside the family began subtly. Bernard Holton, CEO of a key client company, pulled me aside at an industry conference. Is everything all right at Sullivan? He asked. I had a strange conversation with your brother last week. He implied there might be some reorganization coming. When I pressed for details, Bernard looked uncomfortable. He suggested I might want to establish a relationship with him rather than going through you for technical matters. Said something about you possibly moving to a different role. A week later, my executive assistant Rachel placed a folder on my desk with an expression I couldn't quite read. I found these in the copy room, she said quietly. I think you should see them. Inside were financial documents I'd never been shown. Consulting contracts paying my parents enormous fees beyond their salaries, real estate purchased by the company for their personal use, and most disturbing, a succession plan dated 2 years earlier that named Lawrence as the sole future CEO. That evening, I stayed late reviewing company financial records I did have access to. What I found disturbed me deeply. While the company was indeed profitable, an unusual amount of money was flowing to my parents through various channels, special dividends, consulting fees, personal expenses categorized as business costs. They weren't building the company for the future, They were extracting as much value as possible for themselves. The next revelation came from Rachel again, who had become my eyes and ears in the parts of the company increasingly close to me. "They're issuing new shares," she told me. "Lawrence is receiving a 20% equity stake." I checked the records. "You've never been issued any shares at all." I confronted my brother directly, catching him alone in the conference room after hours. "What exactly is happening here, Lawrence?" I demanded. "Why are you receiving company shares while I get nothing?" He leaned back in his chair with an unfamiliar confidence. "Amanda, you've always been the smart one. So figure it out. You're an employee. A valuable one, sure, but still just an employee. This company has always been my birthright." "That's not what Dad always told me," I countered. "And I'm the one who's grown this company, created our most successful products, and we appreciate your contributions," he interrupted with a patronizing smile. "But let's be honest, you're too expensive. Your division's budget has tripled. You keep hiring these specialized engineers at premium salaries, and you insist on all this expensive testing and validation. Dad and Mom need to maximize their retirement fund, not reinvest everything in your engineering fantasies." The pieces suddenly aligned with sickening clarity. My parents viewed Sullivan Industries not as the multi-generational legacy my grandfather had envisioned, but as their personal retirement plan. My innovations and growth strategies were valuable only insofar as they generated immediate profit that could be extracted. Long-term investment in engineering excellence, the philosophy that had built the company, was now seen as an unnecessary expense. The company's 30th anniversary celebration became the public manifestation of the private reality I was discovering. During his speech, my father chronicled the company's history and recent successes. When he reached the development of the S-500 system, my creation, my team, my countless nights and weekends, he placed his hand on Lawrence's shoulder. "The next generation is already taking us to new heights," he said. "Lawrence's vision for our flagship product line has positioned Sullivan Industries as an industry leader." I sat frozen as applause filled the room. Lawrence hadn't contributed a single idea to the S-500. He couldn't even explain its basic operating principles. Yet here was my father, rewriting history in front of the entire company and our industry partners. That night, I couldn't sleep. The betrayal felt physical, a hollowness in my chest, a tightness in my throat. The company I had helped build, the legacy I thought I was securing, the family I had sacrificed everything for, none of it was what I had believed. My loyalty had been to a fiction, a story I had told myself about family and legacy that had never aligned with my parents' actual intentions. The anxiety began affecting my health. I developed migraines for the first time in my life. My normally low blood pressure crept upward. I lost 8 pounds in 2 weeks without trying. Each day brought new evidence that my position was being systematically undermined, yet I kept working with the same dedication, telling myself that the quality of my work would ultimately be recognized and rewarded. Then came the Monday morning that changed everything. "Your parents would like to see you in the main conference room at 9 a.m., read the email that appeared in my inbox that Monday morning. No subject line, no explanation. Sent from my father's assistant rather than from either of my parents directly. I felt a strange calm as I walked to the meeting, as though I was moving through water. Part of me already knew what was coming. The conference room, where I had presented countless innovations and led hundreds of team meetings, felt foreign with just my parents sitting at the far end of the table. My mother's reading glasses were perched on her nose as she reviewed some document. My father was typing on his phone, not looking up when I entered. "Sit down, Amanda," he said, still focused on his screen. The next 15 minutes remain etched in my memory with perfect, painful clarity. "We've been reviewing the company financials," my father began, finally setting his phone down. "And we've had to make some difficult decisions about our organizational structure." My mother slid a document across the table. "We're eliminating your position effective immediately." I stared at the severance agreement, the words blurring slightly. "You're firing me? After 12 years. "We prefer to call it restructuring," my mother said. The engineering division has become unsustainably expensive under your leadership. Your salary, the specialized team you've built, the testing protocols you insist on, we simply can't justify these expenses anymore. Those expenses generated $43 million in revenue last year, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. The S500 system alone accounts for 60% of our business. The S500 is established now, my father countered. We don't need the same level of engineering oversight to maintain production. Lawrence can handle the client relationships and strategic direction. Lawrence doesn't understand how the system works, I said. He can't answer technical questions, troubleshoot problems, or direct improvements. He understands the financial side, my mother replied. And that's what matters at this stage. We've hired a contract engineering manager at half your salary who can handle the day-to-day technical matters. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated that it momentarily left me speechless. 12 years of dedication, of innovations that transformed a struggling family business into an industry leader, of personal sacrifices, all reduced to a line-item expense that could be cut to increase my parents' profit margin. When do you want me to transition my projects? I finally asked. My father checked his watch. No transition necessary. We'll need you to clean out your office immediately. Lawrence has already been briefed on the status of all major projects. I have active designs, custom client implementations, research, all company property, my mother interrupted, pushing another document forward. This intellectual property agreement confirms that everything you've developed belongs to Sullivan Industries. And this non-compete prevents you from working for any competitor for 3 years, my father added, indicating a third document. Standard protection for our proprietary information. I didn't reach for the papers. You planned this. How long? They exchanged a glance that confirmed everything. This wasn't a sudden decision or a financial necessity. This had been orchestrated, probably for months or even years. We need your office cleared by noon, my father said, ignoring my question. Security will assist you. Security. Like I was a threat rather than the person who had built the modern version of Sullivan Industries. Like I might steal something rather than being the creator of everything valuable the company now possessed. I stood up, still not touching the documents. I'll need to review these with my attorney. You have until Friday to sign, my mother said. After that, the severance offer expires. As I turned to leave, my father spoke again. Amanda, this is business, not personal. I hope you can understand that. But it wasn't business. No rational business decision would remove the chief innovator and technical leader from a technology company at the peak of its success. This was deeply personal, a family betrayal masked as a corporate restructuring. Security was indeed waiting outside the conference room. Mark Davis, who had been with the company for 20 years and had always greeted me with respect. Now, he couldn't meet my eyes as he explained he needed to escort me to my office and then out of the building. I'm sorry, Miss Sullivan, he said quietly. This doesn't feel right. My office, where I had spent more waking hours than in my own home for the past decade, had already been partially boxed up. My engineering notebooks were missing from their shelf. My prototype models had been removed from the credenza. The framed patent certificates were gone from the wall. Some of your personal items were already packed, Mark explained uncomfortably. Your brother supervised it on Friday afternoon. Friday. While I was visiting a client site, they had already begun erasing my presence. I looked around at what remained. Family photos, industry awards, reference books. What struck me most was what was missing: all my technical documentation, my research notes, my design iterations for projects in development. Even my personal engineering notebook, which contained ideas and concepts I had specifically labeled as personal intellectual property, was nowhere to be found. As I packed the remaining items under Mark's uncomfortable supervision, my phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Lawrence moved into your office over the weekend. Engineering team wasn't told anything. Where are you? I didn't respond. Couldn't respond. The systematic nature of the betrayal was still sinking in. This hadn't been a sudden decision. It had been meticulously planned and executed while I remained loyally focused on growing the business my grandfather had founded. As Mark escorted me through the engineering department, I saw the shocked faces of my team. No announcement had been made. No explanation was offered. I was simply being marched out like a criminal while my colleagues watched in confusion. "Amanda, what's happening?" called Michael, my lead systems engineer. "Ask Lawrence," I replied, continuing toward the exit. Mark walked me all the way to my car. "This isn't right," he said again as I placed the box in my trunk. "Everyone knows what you've done for this company." "Apparently not everyone," I replied. I've replayed that drive home countless times in my mind. The surreal quality of the morning sun, the familiar route suddenly feeling foreign, the absolute silence in my car because I couldn't bear to hear even music. 12 years of my life, my identity, my purpose, ended in a 15-minute meeting with the people I had trusted most in the world. At home, I did what engineers do. I analyzed the problem methodically. I called an attorney specializing in employment and intellectual property law, forwarded the severance documents, and scheduled a consultation for the following day. I made a detailed inventory of what had been removed from my office, without my consent. I wrote down every significant innovation, design, and process improvement I had created during my tenure, noting which ones I had documentation for outside of company records. That evening, Rachel called from her personal phone. "They told everyone you resigned for personal reasons," she said. "Lawrence held an all-hands meeting this afternoon announcing he's taking over engineering operations. Amanda, he couldn't answer basic questions about the Johnson project. The technical team is in shock." "What about my engineering notebooks?" I asked.
"Gone."
"Lawrence took them Friday. Said they were company property that needed to be secured." Those notebooks contain not just my work for Sullivan Industries, but my personal ideas, concepts I had developed on my own time, innovations I had specifically noted as my individual intellectual property. The legal implications were significant, and my parents and brother knew it. The next day, my attorney confirmed what I already suspected. The non-compete was overly broad and likely unenforceable. The intellectual property claims overreached, and the removal of my personal notebooks potentially constituted theft of intellectual property. But fighting it would mean a protracted legal battle against my own family, with the company resources arrayed against me. "They're counting on your emotional attachment to prevent you from challenging this," she said. "But from a legal standpoint, they've made several actionable mistakes." I sat with that knowledge, unable to make a decision immediately. The betrayal felt too raw, too complete to process clearly. I needed time to understand not just what had happened, but what it meant for my future. That first week of unemployment was the darkest period of my life. For 12 years, Sullivan Industries had been my purpose, my identity, my family legacy. Now I was cut off completely. From the company, from the projects I had built, from the future I had believed in. I cycled through grief, rage, disbelief, and a profound sense of foolishness for having trusted so completely. Former employees began reaching out, first Rachel, then Michael and other engineers from my team, then even people from other departments. The story they told was consistent. Confusion within the company, Lawrence completely out of his depth in engineering meetings, clients asking questions he couldn't answer, production issues going unresolved. Industry colleagues called too, expressing shock at my sudden resignation. Several mentioned they had received promotional materials naming Lawrence as the engineering visionary behind Sullivan's innovations. One forwarded an email claiming he had been the chief architect of the S-500 system, a system he had actively criticized during its development. The most revealing information came from Rachel a week after my termination. She had accessed company records showing my parents had been planning this move for at least 14 months. They had interviewed replacement engineers, restructured financial systems to reduce my visibility, and systematically moved my innovations into Lawrence's portfolio in company documentation. Most disturbingly, they had filed patent updates for my designs, removing my name as primary inventor and replacing it with Lawrence's. I'd love to hear if any of you have experienced workplace betrayal like this, especially from family members. The shock of being cast aside after giving everything to a company can be overwhelming. If you're going through something similar, remember you're not alone. Leave a comment sharing your experience, and let's continue with what happened next in this painful family business drama. For 3 days after being fired, I barely left my bedroom. The betrayal felt physical, a constant heaviness in my chest, a knot in my stomach that wouldn't dissolve. I ignored calls from friends, former colleagues, and industry contacts. I couldn't bear to explain what had happened when I was still struggling to comprehend it myself. On the 4th day, my former MIT professor and mentor, Dr. Eleanor Winters, appeared on my doorstep. "Rachel called me," she explained, setting down a bag of groceries in my kitchen.
"She's worried about you."
"So am I." Dr. Winters had always possessed the rare ability to cut through emotional fog with laser precision. As we sat at my kitchen table, she didn't offer platitudes or easy reassurance. Instead, she asked questions that forced me to think beyond the immediate pain. "What do you actually want now, Amanda? Not what you thought you wanted last week, but right now, with all the information you have." The question caught me off guard. What did I want? Revenge? Validation? My old life back? "I want recognition for my work," I finally said. "I want to continue creating and innovating without betrayal hanging over me. I paused, realizing the truth as I spoke it. "I want to build something that's truly mine, where my contributions can't be stolen or denied." Dr. Winters nodded. "Then let's start there. Not with what you've lost, but with what you're going to create next." That conversation marked the beginning of my strategic rather than emotional response. The next morning, I called Patricia Hernandez, the intellectual property attorney I had consulted earlier. "I won't be signing their severance agreement," I told her. "And I want to discuss options for protecting my innovations." Patricia's assessment was blunt but clarifying. "Based on the documentation you've provided, there are clear instances of intellectual property theft and corporate malfeasance. The question isn't whether you have a case, you do. The question is whether a prolonged legal battle with your family is how you want to spend the next 2 to 3 years." She outlined my options. An aggressive legal strategy that would likely result in a favorable settlement but would consume my energy and focus for the foreseeable future, or a more targeted approach that would protect my most significant personal innovations while allowing me to move forward professionally. "They're expecting you to either accept their terms out of family loyalty or fight them on everything out of anger," Patricia explained. "A selective, strategic response will catch them off guard." I chose the strategic path. Rather than contesting everything, I focused on documenting and legally protecting specific innovations that I had clearly developed on my own time. I authorized Patricia to send a precisely worded letter refusing the severance package, rejecting the non-compete as unenforceable, and demanding the immediate return of my personal engineering notebooks and intellectual property. "This is just step 1, Patricia warned. "Be prepared for them to escalate before they consider compromise." While the legal wheels began turning, I received an unexpected call from Bernard Holton, the CEO who had warned me about Lawrence's comments months earlier. "I just had the most baffling technical meeting with your brother," he said without preamble. "Amanda," he presented specifications for an updated control system that violated basic physics principles. When our engineers questioned the discrepancies, he couldn't provide coherent answers. "What's happening at Sullivan?" This was the first of what would become a steady stream of similar calls from clients, suppliers, and industry partners. Lawrence was attempting to maintain the facade that nothing had changed, but his profound lack of technical knowledge was becoming increasingly apparent in every interaction. Meanwhile, something remarkable was happening within Sullivan Industries. 2 weeks after my termination, Rachel submitted her resignation. The day after, Michael and 3 other senior engineers from my team did the same. By the end of the month, 11 key technical staff had left the company. "No one wants to work for someone who doesn't understand what they're doing," Michael told me during a lunch meeting. "And no one trusts leadership that would discard the person who built the entire technical foundation of the company." The exodus created an unexpected opportunity. With a core group of experienced engineers who shared my vision for technical excellence, I began considering the possibility of starting my own firm. Not just as a response to betrayal, but as the chance to build something aligned with my grandfather's original values: innovation, integrity, and long-term thinking. I leased a small office space and invited my former team members to discuss the possibility. The response was overwhelming. Not just enthusiasm for the venture, but immediate commitments to join once non-compete periods expired. Within 3 weeks, I had drafted a business plan for Pathway Aerospace Engineering, focusing on next-generation control systems for commercial and defense applications. The first call from my father came exactly 1 month after he had fired me. I let it go to voicemail. "Amanda, we need to discuss some technical questions about the Raytheon implementation," he said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "Call me back when you get this." I didn't. 3 more calls followed over the next 2 days, each message increasingly urgent. Finally, I received a text directly from Lawrence. "Can't make sense of your notes on the S-500 redundancy systems. Client meeting tomorrow morning. Need your input ASAP." I forwarded the message to Patricia with a brief note. Documentation of ongoing use of my intellectual property. The real shock came 2 days later when Rachel called with news from inside Sullivan Industries. "They lost the Anderson Aerospace contract," she said. Lawrence couldn't answer technical questions during the quarterly review, and when the client asked to speak with the engineering team, he couldn't produce anyone with more than 3 weeks of experience on the project. They pulled $40 million of business on the spot. I felt a complex mix of emotions: vindication tinged with sadness for the company my grandfather had built, satisfaction at the natural consequences of my parents' choices alongside concern for the employees who remained. But mostly, I felt a growing clarity about my path forward. That clarity strengthened when I received a call from Westfield Technology Partners, a venture capital firm specializing in aerospace and defense startups. "We've been following your work at Sullivan for years," said the managing partner. "Several of your former clients mentioned you might be establishing your own venture. We'd be very interested in discussing investment possibilities." Within days, I had meetings scheduled with 3 different investment groups, all eager to back an engineering firm led by the innovator behind Sullivan Industries' most successful products. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very expertise my parents had devalued was now my most valuable asset. 6 weeks after my termination, I made my first public appearance at the National Aerospace Engineering Conference. I had debated attending, knowing I would encounter industry colleagues who would question my departure from Sullivan Industries. But Patricia had been adamant. "Hiding creates the impression you've done something wrong," she said. "Appearing confident and focused on the future controls the narrative." She was right. At the conference, I was approached continuously by colleagues expressing support and clients inquiring about my future plans. Several mentioned concerning quality issues that had emerged in Sullivan products since my departure. Most significantly, 2 major clients took me aside to explicitly state they would follow me to any new venture. The most satisfying moment came during Lawrence's presentation on next-generation control systems, a session I attended incognito in the back row. He stumbled through slides I had created months earlier, unable to answer basic technical questions from the audience. When an engineer from Boeing asked about the adaptive response algorithms, a feature I had personally designed, Lawrence's answer was so incoherent that several attendees actually walked out. As I quietly exited the session, my phone buzzed with yet another call from my father. This time, I answered. "Amanda." His voice carried an unfamiliar note of anxiety. "We need to talk about the Johnson implementation. There are issues." "I don't work for Sullivan Industries anymore," I replied calmly. "Remember? I was too expensive." "This is serious, Amanda. The system is showing anomalies in testing. The client is threatening to reject the entire shipment." "That sounds like a problem for your engineering team," I said. "You know damn well we don't have an engineering team anymore." His composure cracked. "Half the department resigned, and the new hires don't understand your designs." "My designs?" I couldn't help but press the point. According to company communications, Lawrence is the engineering visionary behind all Sullivan innovations. Surely, he can resolve these technical issues. The silence on the other end was telling. If Sullivan Industries wants to hire Pathway Aerospace Engineering as a consultant, you can contact our business office to discuss rates, I continued. Otherwise, I wish you luck with your technical challenges. I ended the call feeling neither triumph nor bitterness, just a clear-eyed recognition that I was finally establishing appropriate boundaries with people who had never respected mine. My mother's response came through a different channel. 3 days later, a mutual family friend forwarded me a link to her private Facebook post describing how her ungrateful daughter had abandoned the family business after everything we did for her and was now actively trying to destroy her brother's success out of jealousy. The post included childhood photos of Lawrence and me, carefully selected to show him as the loving brother and me as perpetually dissatisfied. It was a masterclass in manipulative narrative, and it would have wounded me deeply just weeks earlier. Now, I simply forwarded it to Patricia with the note, potential defamation to discuss. By the 2-month mark after my termination, Pathway Aerospace Engineering had secured initial funding, leased permanent office space, and begun the process of patenting my newest innovations, designs I had conceptualized but not documented within Sullivan Industries. Former team members were preparing to join as soon as their notice periods or non-competes allowed. Most significantly, 3 major clients had indicated they would transfer business to my new company once we were operational. The contrast between my forward momentum and Sullivan Industries' deterioration became increasingly apparent. Industry gossip reported production delays, quality control issues, and client dissatisfaction. The company's stock value had dropped 23%. Lawrence had been conspicuously absent from recent industry events, and rumors circulated about emergency board meetings. Then came the call that confirmed everything. Sullivan Industries' largest military contractor requested an urgent meeting with me, not to discuss future business, but to address concerns about systems already in production. We've identified critical failures in the latest S-500 implementation, the procurement director explained. The documentation indicates you were the principal engineer, but Sullivan claims they can't consult with you due to conflicting business interests. We're considering invoking the safety override clause in our contract to bring you in directly. The safety override was a standard provision in military contracts allowing manufacturers to consult with original designers regardless of current employment status when public safety was potentially compromised. Its potential invocation represented a worst-case scenario for Sullivan Industries, a public admission that they couldn't maintain the quality of their own signature product. As I ended the call, I realized that the company my grandfather had built, that I had helped transform into an industry leader, was now facing an existential threat, not because I had sought revenge, but because my parents and brother had fundamentally misunderstood what actually made the business valuable. The next day, my father called again. This time, I could hear genuine fear in his voice. "We need to talk, Amanda. Not as Sullivan Industries and a former employee. As family." The consequences of my parents' decision unfolded with the inexorable logic of an engineering failure analysis, one compromised component leading to system-wide collapse. 2 days after my father's desperate call, Sullivan Industries lost its cornerstone military contract. The client cited critical personnel changes affecting product integrity in their termination letter, corporate language for, "You fired the only person who understood how this technology actually works." The contract had represented 30% of Sullivan's annual revenue. News of the termination leaked to industry publications within hours. Sullivan Industries stock dropped 18% in a single trading day. Financial analysts began questioning the company's viability without its core technical leadership. Suppliers tightened credit terms, demanding payment upfront where they had previously offered 60-day terms. I watched these developments with complicated emotions. The company still employed people I respected, engineers, production staff, and support personnel who had done nothing to deserve this instability. Yet there was undeniable vindication in seeing the natural consequences of my parents' choices unfold. The morning after the stock plunge, Lawrence called me directly for the first time since my termination. "This is your fault," he began without greeting. "You turned our military clients against us." I haven't spoken to your military clients, I replied truthfully. They reached out to me with safety concerns, which I referred back to Sullivan Industries as required by regulation. You know exactly what you're doing, he continued, his voice slurring slightly despite the early hour. You've always been jealous that Dad wanted me to take over eventually. Lawrence, are you drinking at 9 in the morning? The silence confirmed my suspicion. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted from accusation to something closer to desperation. Just tell me how to fix the stabilization issue in the S-500. I have the technical team working around the clock, but no one understands the adaptive calibration sequence. That's because I designed it specifically to prevent unauthorized modification, I explained. It's a security feature for a system with military applications, Lawrence. It's functioning exactly as intended. After I hung up, I sat for a long moment considering the implications. Sullivan Industries was imploding faster than I had anticipated. While my strategic focus had been building Pathway Aerospace, circumstances were creating an unexpected opportunity and responsibility. That afternoon, I convened a meeting with my core team at Pathway. Sullivan Industries is failing, I told them bluntly. We need to consider what that means for our industry, their employees, and our future plans. Michael, my former lead engineer, asked the question everyone was thinking. Are we accelerating our timeline to capture their market share? I'm considering a different approach, I replied. We may be in a position to acquire Sullivan rather than simply compete with it. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. An acquisition would be poetic justice, the daughter fired for being too expensive, returning to purchase the company at a steeply discounted price. But my motivation wasn't revenge. It was preservation of my grandfather's legacy and protection of employees who deserved better leadership. While we discussed acquisition scenarios, Pathway Aerospace continued its impressive launch trajectory. Our first original patent filing, an advanced neural network system for flight control optimization, generated immediate industry attention. 2 former Sullivan clients signed letters of intent to transfer their business to Pathway once we were fully operational. Most significantly, 6 more engineers from Sullivan submitted their resignations and applied to join our team. Rachel, now my operations director, maintained connections with former colleagues still at Sullivan. The reports she brought back were increasingly concerning. Quality control failures have tripled, she told me. Lawrence approved production changes without understanding their implications. They're shipping defective units to meet contractual deadlines, knowing they'll fail in the field. That's not just bad business, I replied. That's potentially dangerous. The situation escalated when my father suffered a minor heart attack, brought on, according to family friends, by the stress of the company's rapid decline. He was hospitalized overnight and released with orders to reduce stress. The incident led to my first direct contact with my mother since my termination. Are you satisfied now? She texted. Your father is in the hospital because of your vindictiveness. I chose not to engage with the accusation, responding only, I'm glad to hear Dad is recovering. I wish him good health. Her reply came hours later, markedly different in tone. The cardiologist says he needs to step back from day-to-day operations. We should talk. The meeting she proposed took place at a neutral location, a private room at the country club where my parents were members. I arrived early, prepared for accusations or manipulative appeals to family loyalty. What I encountered instead was something I never expected, my mother looking genuinely defeated. The company is failing, she admitted after tense initial greetings. Lawrence can't handle the technical side, clients are leaving, and the board is threatening to remove us from operational control. That's unfortunate, I replied neutrally. But I'm not sure why you're telling me this. We need your help, Amanda. The words seemed physically painful for her to say. Your father can't return to full-time management. Lawrence is... She paused, searching for words. Lawrence is struggling with the pressure. You fired me, I reminded her. You allowed my personal engineering notebooks to be confiscated. You supported Lawrence claiming credit for my innovations. And now you want my help. We made a mistake, she said, the admission clearly costing her considerable pride. We didn't fully understand what you contributed to Sullivan Industries. The acknowledgement was both gratifying and infuriating in its understatement. They hadn't fully understood that the chief engineer and innovator was essential to an engineering company. The willful blindness was almost incomprehensible. I have my own company now, I told her. Pathway Aerospace is my priority. What if? She hesitated. What if we discussed you returning in a leadership capacity? Co-CEO with Lawrence, perhaps? The offer might have tempted me months earlier, when the wound was fresh and I still longed for the validation of my family's recognition. Now it seemed almost quaint in its inadequacy. That's not possible, I said. But Pathway might be interested in discussing an acquisition of Sullivan Industries, assuming due diligence confirms salvageable value. The shock on my mother's face was nearly comical. You want to buy the company? From us? It would be a business transaction, not a family matter, I clarified. Sullivan has valuable patents, manufacturing capabilities, and some remaining client relationships. Those assets might complement Pathway's growth strategy. I left her with that possibility to consider, knowing it would need to be discussed with my father and the board. As I drove away, I realized how profoundly my perspective had shifted. I no longer needed my parents' approval or recognition. Their company was now simply a potential business acquisition. Nothing more, nothing less. 2 days later, my attorney received a call from Sullivan Industries' corporate counsel requesting preliminary acquisition discussions. Apparently, the board had overruled my parents' initial rejection of the idea, recognizing that Pathway's offer might be their best option as other potential buyers became aware of Sullivan's technical and operational deficiencies. Meanwhile, Lawrence's deterioration continued. He missed a critical client presentation, with reports suggesting he had been too intoxicated to attend. Engineering staff who remained at Sullivan described him having emotional outbursts in technical meetings when he couldn't understand the concepts being discussed. Most concerning, he had apparently authorized modifications to the S-500 system without proper testing, creating potential safety issues that would require expensive recalls. The situation came to a head at an industry conference in Chicago. I was scheduled to present Pathway's new control system architecture to a packed audience of aerospace engineers and executives. As I prepared backstage, Lawrence appeared, visibly intoxicated despite the early hour. "You think you've won," he slurred, security personnel already moving toward him. "You've turned everyone against me." "You need help, Lawrence," I said quietly. "This isn't about winning." "It was supposed to be mine," he continued as security reached us. "Dad always promised it would be mine." As they escorted him out, I felt an unexpected wave of pity. Lawrence had been caught in our parents' manipulation as surely as I had, raised to expect control of a company he wasn't qualified to lead, promised a future he couldn't possibly sustain. The incident made industry news, accelerating Sullivan Industries' reputation collapse. By the following week, their stock had fallen to an all-time low, and my acquisition team reported that the board was now eager to complete a deal as quickly as possible. In a final ironic twist, the intellectual property dispute that Patricia had been carefully documenting became unnecessary leverage. The acquisition would transfer all patents and intellectual rights to Pathway, rendering the legal battle moot. My innovations would return to my control through a straightforward business transaction rather than contentious litigation. 8 weeks after Sullivan Industries fired me for being too expensive, I sat across from their board of directors, including my ashen-faced father and tight-lipped mother, presenting Pathway's acquisition terms. The purchase price was 40% of what the company had been valued at when I was terminated. The terms included specific provisions. My parents would fully retire from all operational roles, Lawrence would enter a substance abuse treatment program, and the company would be reorganized under the Pathway leadership structure. "You're destroying your father's legacy," my mother said during a break in the negotiations. "I'm preserving my grandfather's legacy," I corrected her. "There's a difference." As I drove home that evening, I realized that what had begun as the most painful betrayal of my life had transformed into something unexpected: freedom. Freedom from seeking approval I would never receive. Freedom from sacrificing my well-being for people who didn't value it. Freedom to build something that truly reflected my values, rather than trying to redeem a family legacy that had already been compromised. That night, for the first time since my termination, I slept without anxiety. The company I had loved was returning to my stewardship, but on my terms. The innovations I had created would continue to benefit the industry. Most importantly, I had discovered my own worth independent of family validation, a lesson more valuable than any company could ever be. The following weekend, I finally took a personal day and accepted a dinner invitation from Alex Chen, an aerospace materials specialist I'd met at the Chicago conference. As we enjoyed a relaxed evening discussing everything but work, I realized this was perhaps the most significant change of all. I was finally allowing myself to build a life beyond the company walls. 6 months after my termination from Sullivan Industries, I stood at the podium in what had once been my father's boardroom, addressing the combined workforce of what was now Pathway Sullivan Aerospace. The acquisition had been finalized 3 weeks earlier, following extensive due diligence and negotiation. Today marks not an ending, but a restoration, I told the assembled employees. A return to the founding principles that built this company. Technical excellence, innovation, and integrity. The journey to this moment had been more complex than a simple corporate takeover. As Pathway's acquisition team delved into Sullivan's operations, we discovered concerning issues beyond what I had anticipated. Safety protocols circumvented to meet deadlines, financial irregularities that bordered on fraud, and a corporate culture that had deteriorated into fear and distrust under my family's increasingly desperate management. Addressing these problems required more than new ownership. It demanded a fundamental restructuring. We maintained the Sullivan manufacturing facilities and retained most production staff, but completely reorganized the engineering and quality control departments. Former Sullivan employees who had joined Pathway returned to leadership positions, bringing stability and technical competence back to projects that had floundered in their absence. The acquisition terms had been unambiguous regarding my family's future involvement. My parents would fully retire with a modest consulting arrangement that acknowledged their founding role while removing them from operational decisions. Lawrence would receive support for substance abuse treatment and mental health services, but no management position. My father had initially resisted these conditions, clinging to the belief that he could remain as a figurehead chairman. The board, recognizing the company's precarious position, overruled him. My mother, surprisingly, had been more pragmatic, perhaps finally recognizing the severity of the situation or simply prioritizing their financial security over pride. The most difficult conversation came 2 weeks before the acquisition closed, when my parents requested a private family meeting. I agreed with significant hesitation, insisting that it take place on neutral ground with Patricia joining as my representative. We met at Dr. Winter's university office, a space that held no emotional triggers for any of us. My parents arrived looking noticeably aged from the stress of recent months. My father, still recovering from his heart incident, moved more slowly than I remembered. For a moment, seeing their vulnerability stirred complicated emotions, not forgiveness, but a kind of muted empathy. "We want to understand what happened," my father began after uncomfortable initial greetings. "How did we get here?" The question was so lacking in self-awareness that I nearly laughed. "You fired me," I reminded him. "You devalued my contributions, took credit for my innovations, and chose Lawrence to lead despite his obvious lack of qualifications. What happened is the natural consequence of those decisions." "We always intended for both of you to have roles in the company," my mother countered. "You were the technical side, Lawrence the business side. That was the plan. Then why systematically exclude me from business decisions? Why issue equity to Lawrence, but not to me? Why present him as the engineering visionary when he couldn't explain basic principles?" They exchanged glances, and for the first time, I sensed genuine confusion rather than manipulation. They truly didn't understand the contradiction in their actions. "Lawrence needed the confidence boost," my father finally said. "You were always so capable, so self-sufficient. Lawrence needed more support to succeed." The revelation was both illuminating and infuriating. Their favoritism hadn't been calculated malice, but a profound blindness, seeing Lawrence's mediocrity as requiring protection while treating my excellence as something that needed no nurturing or recognition. "So you punished me for being competent," I said quietly, "and rewarded Lawrence for being inadequate." "We didn't see it that way," my mother insisted. "We were trying to balance things between you. By firing me? By taking my engineering notebooks? By claiming my innovations were Lawrence's work." My father looked genuinely uncomfortable. "The termination was a business decision. Your division was expensive to operate. My division generated 70% of company revenue," I countered. "That's not a valid business justification." The conversation continued in this vein, my parents unable or unwilling to acknowledge the fundamental betrayal at the heart of their actions, instead focusing on surface-level justifications that collapsed under minimal scrutiny. It was enlightening but ultimately unsatisfying, revealing not malicious intent but something perhaps more disappointing, a profound failure of perception and judgment from people I had once believed were wise stewards of my grandfather's legacy. As we prepared to leave, my father made one final comment that suggested at least partial recognition of reality. "Lawrence wasn't ready," he admitted quietly. "We thought he could grow into the role with the right support team. We were wrong." It wasn't an apology, but it was perhaps as close as he could come to acknowledging the magnitude of their miscalculation. Lawrence's reckoning came through a different channel. 3 days after entering a residential treatment program for alcohol dependency, he requested a meeting with me. Against Patricia's advice, I agreed to visit him at the facility. I found him markedly changed from the entitled, dismissive brother who had moved into my office before I was even terminated. Sobriety and therapy had stripped away his defensive arrogance, revealing something I hadn't seen since we were children: vulnerability. "I've been lying to myself for years," he said after we settled into the facility's visiting room. "Pretending I understood things I didn't, claiming achievements that weren't mine, believing I deserved a position I wasn't qualified for." "Why?" I asked simply. "Because Dad always told me I would run the company someday. It was promised to me from childhood, my birthright. But I knew I couldn't do what you did. I couldn't create or innovate or solve problems the way you could." He looked down at his hands. "So I convinced myself that those things weren't actually important, that relationships and business strategy were what really mattered." "Those things do matter," I acknowledged, "but not at the expense of understanding the core business." He nodded, seeming genuinely reflective. "When they fired you, I thought it meant I was right, that they valued my contributions over yours. It felt like validation. Then everything started falling apart, and I couldn't fix any of it. I couldn't even understand what was breaking." The conversation continued with surprising honesty. Lawrence admitted to feeling perpetually inadequate compared to me throughout childhood, retreating into social skills and charm as his domain while resenting my technical abilities. Our parents had exacerbated this division, praising his people skills while treating my engineering talent as simply expected. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said as our meeting concluded. "But I am sorry, Amanda. Not just for what happened at the company, but for years of resentment and undermining. You deserved better from your brother." This conversation, unlike the one with my parents, felt like genuine reconciliation, not erasing the past, but acknowledging it honestly as a foundation for something healthier. It was the beginning of a long process of rebuilding trust, but it was a beginning. The formal acquisition closing brought these personal resolutions into the professional sphere. The terms specifically addressed the future roles of all family members. My parents received emeritus titles and financial settlements that recognized their founding contributions while removing them from operational control. Lawrence would be offered an entry-level position after completing his treatment program, not in engineering, but in client relations where his interpersonal skills could be valuable if properly directed. Most importantly, the company would operate under governance principles that prevented the kind of favoritism and personal agenda that had corrupted its original mission. A professional board with independent members would oversee major decisions. Clear succession planning would be implemented based on merit rather than family connections. The engineering-first ethos my grandfather had established would be restored as the company's guiding principle. 1 year after my termination, Pathway Sullivan Aerospace had not only stabilized but was thriving. We had recovered most of the clients lost during the turmoil, secured 3 major new contracts, and successfully integrated the best elements of both companies. Our stock value had increased 62% from the acquisition price, validating the business case for the merger. On a personal level, the transformation was equally profound. The European vacation I had postponed for years became reality. 3 weeks exploring Italy with Alex, who had become more than just a dinner companion. I established boundaries around my work hours, making time for activities and relationships I had previously sacrificed to company demands. Most significantly, I found myself free of the constant need to prove my worth to people who would never fully recognize it. My parents adjusted to retirement with predictable difficulty. My father especially struggled with his reduced role, occasionally sending unsolicited advice or criticizing decisions announced in company press releases. But the boundaries remained firm, and over time, our interactions evolved into something resembling a normal family relationship, not particularly close, but civil and occasionally even pleasant. Lawrence emerged from treatment with genuine commitment to recovery. He accepted the entry-level position in client relations, working under a senior director who provided both mentorship and accountability. His natural charm, now directed toward appropriate goals rather than self-aggrandizement, proved valuable in rebuilding relationships with customers who had been alienated during the company's difficult period. Our relationship would never return to uncomplicated siblings, but we established a professional respect that seemed healthier than our previous dynamic. 18 months after the acquisition, I stood before the architectural plans for our new headquarters facility. The building would incorporate the best elements of Sullivan's manufacturing capability with Pathway's innovative design philosophy. The central atrium would feature a tribute to my grandfather, Harold Sullivan, not just as the company founder, but as the original engineering visionary whose principles we were restoring. He would be proud, Rachel commented, reviewing the plans beside me. Not just of the company, but of you, having the courage to rebuild what was broken. As I considered her words, I realized that the journey from betrayal to resolution had taught me something essential. True legacy isn't about family names on letterhead or succession based on birth. It's about values that endure beyond individual ego, the commitment to excellence, integrity, and innovation that my grandfather had established, and that I was now extending into the future. The painful family drama that began with my termination had ultimately led to a healthier, more sustainable company. The betrayal that had seemed like an ending had become the catalyst for a more authentic beginning, professionally and personally. The path hadn't been what I expected, but it had led to a destination far better than what I had originally envisioned. Looking back now, I can see that being fired was actually the first step toward genuine freedom. Freedom to create on my own terms, to establish appropriate boundaries, and to build something truly reflective of my values rather than struggling to redeem an inheritance that carried too many compromised expectations. Have you experienced betrayal that eventually led to something better? Family business dynamics can be incredibly complicated, and I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. If this journey of standing up for your worth despite family pressure resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe to hear more stories of overcoming family business betrayal. Thank you for listening to my experience. May it help anyone facing similar challenges to find the courage to value themselves even when family doesn't. And remember to share this with anyone struggling with workplace family dynamics who might need to hear that sometimes the greatest success comes after the most painful rejection.